In 2016, the world was introduced to the most realistic, real-world pandemic scenario of what would happen to the United States if an infectious disease or virus was introduced to the population at large. This information came in the form of a video game called The Division, an amazing game, by the way. If you stick around on this channel long enough, you'll find that I really love video games. Here's the opening trailer to that game.
In 2001, a real-world exercise tested the emergency response to a bioterror attack on the continental United States. The operation was called Dark Winter. Within just a few days, the simulation spiraled out of control. The operation predicted a rapid breakdown in essential institutions, civil disorder, and massive civilian casualties. Dark Winter has revealed how vulnerable we've become. Our lifestyle, our security, our safety, depends on a delicate and unstable economy. We've created a system so complicated that we no longer understand how to control it. Oil, power, shipping, transport. We live in a complex world. And the more complex it gets, the more fragile it becomes. The system is built on a global supply chain that gets things where they're needed, just in time. We've created a house of cards. Remove just one, and everything falls apart. And what's fueling this system?
Money. Americans can spend $90 billion in a single day of shopping. Last year, 200 million people swarmed their local stores on November 23rd. We call that day Black Friday. Did you know that a flu virus can survive on the surface of a banknote for up to 17 days? One day, there will be a pandemic. It could begin during the crush of Black Friday sales. A pathogen will jump from tainted banknotes to human skin, onto food, toys, children, and loved ones. By the time patient zero feels the first sore throat, millions of people will already be infected. From this point, the breakdown will happen fast.
Day 1, hospitals will reach capacity. Panic will strike. Day 2, quarantine zones will be established. Resources will be rationed. Transport will go into lockdown. Day 3, international trade will stop. The oil will dry up. The stock market will collapse. Day 4, the power will fail. The shelves will be empty. The taps will run dry. And once hunger and despair take hold, people will do anything for survival. By day 5, everyone will be a potential threat. Our complex world is primed for breakdown.
And once the chaos strikes,
there won't be resources to save us all.
The only question left is, what will it take to save what remains?
Okay, so what exactly is Dark Winter? Everything I'm about to discuss with you is public information. I'll place links down in the description, and I would highly encourage you to go beyond just watching this video. Don't just take my word for it. Formulate your own opinions and decide what you personally need to do next. This came from an article from Johns Hopkins about the Dark Winter exercise. This exercise took place on June 22nd to the 23rd of 2001. It involved the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Johns Hopkins Center for Civilian Biodefense Studies, the Answer Institute for Homeland Security, and the Oklahoma City National Memorial Institute for the Prevention of Terrorism. This was a senior-level wargaming exercise to determine the national security, intergovernmental, and information challenges of a biological attack on the American homeland. Dark Winter used the smallpox virus to wargame what would happen. Smallpox would be the worst-case scenario with a case fatality rate of around 30%. Even though the World Health Assembly declared that smallpox virus eradicated in 1980, there has always been a lingering fear that it could resurface in a biological attack. The only known stockpiles, and I really want to emphasize known, exist in the United States and Russia. But many experts believe that the virus is not limited to these two locations, as there are many subnational groups pursuing active biological weapons programs. Okay, so now that we're getting into the opinions that I have formulated about this, I have to walk a very fine line. There are certain things that I can't say because of YouTube community guidelines. Again, let me remind you, much of this video is based on facts. Occasionally, I will share my own opinions. If you have some thoughts to add, or maybe you disagree, leave it in the comment section. The United States has long been viewed as the world's superpower. The US dollar drives the entire world economy. The United States itself is viewed as impenetrable, in large part due to our military. But what other countries really fear is you, the American citizen. Why? Have you ever wondered why Japan didn't invade the United States after wiping out Pearl Harbor? Especially since our government believed that if they had attacked, landing in California, they might have reached as far as the Mississippi. After the surrender of Japan, the remaining admirals and generals were asked that question. The response should make you proud to belong to the greatest country in the world. Admiral Yamamoto, the commander of the Japanese fleet, had visited and studied in America, so he was very well aware that because of the Second Amendment in our Constitution and the skill of the average American citizen to use their firearms, it would be nearly impossible to invade and occupy the United States. It has been estimated that there are 2.3 million hunters in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Michigan, and Idaho alone. Those 5 states by themselves represent the largest standing military in the world. Remember, there are 45 other states. So how do you bring the most powerful country in the world to its knees? Destabilize the country with a virus, then convince the American citizens to turn on each other, divide and conquer, then infiltrate the highest levels of government, develop policies that will cripple the country forever. If that doesn't scare you, then I don't know what will. Wake up. This is not a dream. This is really happening. And if you aren't in the US, don't think for a second that this doesn't affect you. It's happening everywhere. Okay, so back to the Dark Winter exercise. This was their findings. Our national security would be at risk. Massive civilian casualties, breakdown in essential institutions. There would be violations to our democratic process, civil disorder, and a loss of faith in the government. Sound familiar? Now, we can clearly see that it doesn't take a smallpox virus to bring this country to its knees. In our current situation now, in 2021, we had a virus introduced with a less than 1% fatality rate. Let's compare notes to the Dark Winter exercise. I'm going to skim over these because I'm placing the links in the description, and I'm going to trust that you will go and do some research and more digging on your own. Okay, number 1, Dark Winter found that our national security would be at risk. During COVID-19, as more and more new cases started popping up across the U.S. by February of 2020, the travel restrictions were put in place to protect American citizens, despite the outcry against it. By the middle of March 2020, the entire country was affected by the virus. This resulted in many statewide lockdowns enforced by the governor of each individual state. Citizens, however, were still able to travel from state to state, therefore rendering the lockdowns useless. Amid protests starting in May 2020, violence erupted across the country. Sections of entire U.S. cities were turned into no-go zones. That means that these organized groups were able to halt the democratic process, therefore putting our national security at risk. Dark Winter correctly predicted and enabled our government to protect our national security interests from outside influence, for the most part. The real threat came from within our own borders, as American citizens fought each other in the streets. Number 2, Dark Winter predicted that there would be massive civilian casualties. During COVID-19, current death totals stand around 456,000. Within the time span of less than 1 year. I want to throw some numbers at you here. Dark Winter's prediction with a 30% case death rate would have amounted to 107,100,000. That's a big number. 19 numbers with a 1% case death rate, roughly 357,000. So that puts us a little above that 1% threshold. I'm not going to try to argue the legitimacy of the numbers. That's not what this video is for, but I will say that I don't believe them. I would say yes, there have been massive civilian casualties. Number 3, Dark Winter predicted the breakdown in essential institutions. 19, the halt to the production of everyday goods and services within our on-time delivery system. Simply put, everyday items that we take for granted that sit on our grocery store shelves every day were gone. Restrictions were put in place to keep people from hoarding essential supplies. Anything deemed non-essential was halted. Even the little things that probably never cross our minds were taken from us, like, I don't know, toilet paper. We probably saw a huge skyrocket in sales for bidets after all this. Anyways, we don't think about our just-in-time delivery system until we can't get what we want, like soda, toilet paper, fresh vegetables, dairy, meats, cleaning supplies, and the list goes on and on. Yes, there was a breakdown in essential institutions causing millions of Americans to panic buy, which forced local governments to institute the equivalent of soft martial law, restricting our buying power. Number 4, Dark Winter found that there would be violations to our democratic process. During 19, around the end of April and the beginning of May, protesting of the stay-at-home orders began. People at this point were exercising their First Amendment rights. Violence soon erupted in several large U.S. cities. Our night skies were lit up by the fires below. Many American citizens during this time lived in fear, and with the knowledge that there would be no help from authorities. Homeowners took shelters, barricading themselves in their homes, hoping not to be noticed. June 8th, 2020, the birth of a nation. The nation of Chaz was started. The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone was declared a free country. Now, we may not always like who our elected president is, but we can all agree to some extent, and I have to be careful here, that they are still the leader of this country. Countries, even new ones, need leaders. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic here, but look, Chaz had no leaders, so this new country didn't last very long, especially since they hadn't quite figured out how they were going to create a supply chain to get essential things like, I don't know, food, water, sanitation. The nation of Chaz lasted about a month. Our democratic process was definitely violated, and in some cases, came to a complete full stop. Number 5, Dark Winter predicted civil disorder. During COVID-19, I think we pretty much got that covered. There is a very clear line being drawn and facilitated by the news media to encourage Americans to hate each other. This has resulted in our country being so divided that many feel that we are on the brink of civil war at any given moment. There's so much civil disorder that the military now occupies the streets of our United States Capitol and many other large U.S. cities. And that leads me to number 6 of Dark Winter. Dark Winter predicted a loss of faith in the United States government. During COVID-19, think about this. What would cause the average American blue-collar worker, by the hundreds of thousands, to march in the streets, burn down cities, threaten the lives of government officials, march on Capitol buildings, create no-go zones where the police aren't allowed, and kill each other in the streets? A loss of faith in the government. As we speak, right now, Congress is discussing a bill called H.R. 127 to attempt to have each and every U.S. law-abiding citizen register their firearms and prohibit the sales of certain ammunition. Remember what I said about the true power of the United States. We, the American citizens, are the most powerful military in the world. If this bill is passed, then the Second Amendment will be no more. Look at every other country that required registration of firearms. The next step is confiscation. What would make our policymakers think that we need a bill like H.R. 127? A government that is very self-aware that there is a very clear loss of faith in that government on both state and national levels.
Now, I know that everything I have discussed in this video is extremely scary. You may be sitting there feeling like there's nothing you can do to stop this ship from sinking. That's not true. Do you remember that scene from A Bug's Life where they're arguing about the ants coming up short with the food that they were supposed to give the grasshoppers? How upset Hopper was? Not because they needed the food. It was never about the food. It was about controlling the ants. If the ants ever realized their true power, the grasshoppers would be in a lot of trouble.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up.
Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life.
It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line.